Tonight, we're going to be talking about the Hellenistic and medieval philosophy, starting with classical philosophy after Aristotle. After Aristotle completed his great speculative system, philosophy moved into a new direction. Four groups of philosophers helped to shape this new direction, namely the Epicureans, the Stoics, the Skeptics, and the Neoplatonists. They were, of course, greatly influenced by their predecessors. Thus, we find that Epicurus relied upon Democritus for his atomic theory of nature. The Stoics made use of Heraclitus' notion of a fiery substance permeating all things. The skeptics built a method of inquiry upon the Socratic form of doubt, and Platonists drew heavily on Plato. What made their philosophy different, however, was not so much its subject matter as its direction and its emphasis. Its emphasis was practical, and its direction was individually centered. Philosophy became more practical by emphasizing the art of living. To be sure, each of these new movements of thought did involve speculative descriptions of the structure of the universe, but instead of working on blueprints for the ideal society and fitting individuals into large social and political organizations, as Plato and Aristotle did, these philosophers led people to think primarily about themselves and how they, as individuals in the larger scheme of nature, could achieve the most satisfactory life. These new discoveries, these new directions in philosophy were brought about to a great extent by historical conditions. After the Peloponnesian War and with the fall of Athens, Greek civilization declined. With the breakdown of the small Greek city-state, individual citizens lost the sense of their own importance and their ability to control their social and political destiny. As they were absorbed into the growing Roman Empire, people increasingly felt this loss of personal control over their lives within their community. When Greece became a mere province of Rome, people lost interest in pursuing the speculative questions concerning the ideal society. What was needed was a practical philosophy to give life direction under changing conditions. And at a time when events overwhelmed people, it seemed futile to try to change history. But if history was beyond humanity's control, at least a person's own life could be managed with some success. Philosophy, therefore, shifted in the direction of increasing concern for the more immediate world of the individual. The Epicureans focused on an ideal for living the Epicureans focused on an ideal for living through what they called ataraxia, or tranquility of soul. The Stoics sought to control their reactions to inevitable events. The skeptics sought to preserve personal freedom by refraining from any basic commitment to ideals whose truth was doubtful. Finally, Platonists promised salvation and a mystical union with God. They all looked to philosophy for a source of meaning for human existence, and it is no wonder that their philosophy, particularly Stoicism, was later to compete with religion for allegiance. They sought to discover ways in which individuals could achieve happiness or contentment in a world that was not altogether friendly and filled with many pitfalls. In their efforts to find meaning, some philosophers of the time, called eclectics, embraced elements from several of the distinct philosophical schools. Whether understood individually or collectively, each approach offers a remarkable insight into human nature. Epicureanism. Epicurus was born about 5 or 6 years after Plato's death, when Aristotle was 42 years old. Born in 342 or 341 BCE on the island of Samos in the Aegean Sea, he was exposed in his teens to the writings of Democritus, whose ideas about nature had a permanent influence on his own philosophy. When the Athenians were driven out of Samos, Epicurus went to Asia Minor, when he became a teacher in several schools. About 306 BCE, he moved to Athens and founded his own school, which met in his garden. In time, this ranked with Plato's Academy, Aristotle's Lyceum, and Zeno's Stoa. as one of the most influential schools of ancient times. Here Epicurus attracted a close group of friends who were attached to him by deep affection and reverence, and to each other by the love of cultivated conversation. In spite of the loss of the bulk of his prolific writings, there emerged from this school a definite approach to philosophy survived Epicurus's death in 270 BCE. The lasting impact of his teaching is shown by its continuous appearance in Athens and its spread to Rome, where the poet Lucretius 95 to 55 BCE embodied the major thoughts of Epicurus in his memorable poem on the nature of things, or in another language, De Rerum Natura, which survives to this day. Epicurus was a practical philosopher. He thought that ideas should have as much effect on the control of life as medicine has on the health of the body. Indeed, he considered philosophy as the medicine of the soul. He did deal with questions such as what was the world made of, and influenced by Democritus, he maintained that everything is composed of tiny particles called atoms in empty space. If that is what the world consists of, thought Epicurus, what consequences follow from that for human behavior? To Epicurus, the chief aim of human life is pleasure. But it is ironic that his name should be linked even today with the indulgent glutton, for nothing could be further from the teachings of Epicurus than the notion that pleasure consists in the triple formula of eat, drink, and be merry. Instead, he took great pains to distinguish between various types of pleasure. For example, some are intense but last only a short while, and others are so intense but last longer, are not so intense but last longer. Also, some pleasures have a painful aftermath, and others give a sense of calm and repose. He tried to refine the principle of pleasure as the basis of conduct. Physics and ethics. What made Epicurus turn to the pleasure principle was the science or physics inherited from Democritus. This science had the effect of stimulating the notion that God created everything and that human behavior should be based on obedience to principles whose source is divine. Building on this atomic theory, Epicurus concluded that everything that exists must be made of external atoms, of eternal atoms, small indestructible bits of hard matter. Apart from these clusters of atoms, nothing else exists. This would mean that if God or gods exists, they too must be material beings. Most importantly, God is not the source or the creator of anything, but is himself the result of a purposeless and random event. The origin of everything is explained by the notion that there is no beginning to the atoms. Atoms have always existed in space. Like raindrops, they were at one time separately falling in space, and since they encountered no resistance, they always remained the same distance apart from each other. During the vertical drop, thought Epicurus, one atom, instead of falling perfectly straight, developed a slight easing to one side. That is, a lateral swerve. In time, this atom moved into the path of an oncoming atom, and the resulting impact forced both of these atoms into the paths of other atoms, thereby setting in motion a whole series of collisions until the atoms had formed into clusters. These clusters, or arrangements of atoms, are the things we see even now, including rocks, flowers, animals, and human beings. In short, the world. Since I used a highlighter I shouldn't have on this thing. Since there were an infinite number of atoms, there must now be an infinite number of worlds. In any case, human beings are not part of a created or purposeful order caused or ruled by God, but rather the accidental product of the collision of atoms. I'll just say, I think that's interesting. I think you should do some looking into nihilism and how I guess just negative of a perspective that is to have about everything. Regardless if that is the case, thinking that's the case is just no good, it seems like. It just does not have any fruit to bear worth bearing. I have nothing really else to say about that. But now they're going to be talking about God and death. With this explanation of the origin of human beings and for the matter of all beings, including divine beings, Epicurus thought that he had liberated people from the fear of God and of death. They no longer had to fear God because God did not control nature or human destiny and was therefore unable to intrude into people's lives. As for death, Epicurus said that this need not bother anyone because only a living person has sensation either of pain or of pleasure. After death, there is no sensation, since the atoms that make up bodies and minds come apart. Thus, there is no longer this particular body or mind, but only a number of distinct atoms that return, as it were, to the primeval inventory of matter to continue the cycle of new formations. Only matter exists, and in human life, all each individual knows is this body and this present moment of experience. The composition of human nature includes atoms of different sizes and shapes. The larger atoms make up bodies, and the smaller, smoother, and swifter atoms account for sensation and thinking. No other principle is needed to explain a person's nature, no God, and therefore no afterlife. Liberation from the fear of God and of death sets the stage for a way of life completely under a person's own control. This was a new direction in moral philosophy, for it focused on the individual and his or her immediate desires for bodily and mental pleasures instead of on abstract principles of right conduct or considerations of God's commands. Just as his physical theory made the individual atom the final basis of all existence, so also Epicurus singled out the individual person as the arena of the moral enterprise. The pleasure principle. Epicurus portrayed the origin of all things in a mechanical way and placed humans into the scheme of things as just another small mechanism whose nature leads us to seek pleasure. Nevertheless, Epicurus reserved for humans both the power and the duty to regulate the traffic of our desires. Even though Epicurus had liberated people from the fear of God's providence, he had no intention thereby of opening the floodgates of passion and indulgence. He was certain that pleasure was the standard of goodness, but he was equally certain that not every kind of pleasure had the same value. If asked how he knew that pleasure was the standard of goodness, Epicurus would answer simply that all people have an immediate feeling of the difference between pleasure and pain, and of the desirability of pleasure. He writes, "We recognize pleasure as the first good innate in us, and from pleasure we begin every act of choice and avoidance, and to pleasure we return again. Feeling," Epicurus said, is as immediate a test of goodness or badness. Feeling, Epicurus said, is as immediate a test of goodness or badness as sensation is a test of truth. To our senses, pain is always bad and pleasure always good, just as seeing tells us whether something in front of us is in front of us or not. Still, in order to guide people to the happiest life, Epicurus emphasized the distinction between various kinds of pleasure. Clearly, some desires are both natural and necessary, as in the case of food. Others are natural but not necessary, as in the case of some types of sexual pleasure. Still, others are neither natural or necessary, as for example any type of luxury or popularity. It was because he could make these clear distinctions that he concluded, "When we maintain that pleasure is the end, we do not mean the pleasures of profligates and those that consist of sensuality, as is supposed by some who are either ignorant or disagree with us or do not understand, but freedom from pain in the body and from trouble in the mind. For it is not continuous drinkings and revellings, nor the satisfaction of lusts, nor the enjoyment of fish and other luxuries of the wealthy table which produce a pleasant life, but sober reasoning, searching out the motives for all choice and avoidance, and banishing mere opinions, to which are due the greatest disturbance of the spirit." Epicurus did not mean to denounce the pleasure of the body. Instead, he meant only to emphasize that too great a concern with these pleasures was both unnatural and the surest way to unhappiness and pain. Certain kinds of bodily pleasures could never be fully satisfied. Further, if such pleasures required continuous indulgence, it followed that people pursuing such pleasures would by definition always be unsatisfied and would therefore constantly suffer some pain. If, for example, they wanted more money or more public acclaim or more exotic foods or a higher position, they would always be dissatisfied with their present situation and would suffer some internal pain. The wise person, on the other hand, is able to determine what is the minimum his or her nature requires and is able to easily and quickly to satisfy these needs. When these needs are satisfied, a person's constitution is in balance. The wise person's diet of bread and water is far more likely to bring happiness than the gourmet's surplus of fancy foods. For the wise person has learned not only to consume little, but also, and this is the key, to need little. The ultimate pleasure human nature seeks is repose, by which Epicurus means the absence of bodily pain and the gentle relaxation of the mind. This sense of repose can best be achieved by scaling down desires, overcoming useless fears, and above all, turning to the pleasures of the mind, which have the highest degree of permanence. In a sense, these pleasures of the mind are physical pleasures inasmuch as they have the effect of preventing overindulgence in matters of the flesh, and therefore preventing their ensuing pain. Pleasures and social justice. Pleasure and social justice is the next topic. Epicurus builds on his account of individual pleasure and extends it to an explanation of social interaction and justice. Epicurus personally sought to detach himself from entanglements with other people, particularly poor people, whose needs and problems were many, just as he sought to detach himself from the tyranny of exotic foods. Nevertheless, our inevitable connection with other people has a real impact on our happiness, which cannot be ignored. First, the development of friendship is a key ingredient to our happiness, particularly when our friends are congenial and intellectually fascinating. Second, a major task of civil society is to deter those who might inflict pain on individuals. Epicurus's theory of physics ruled out a higher rational order of things, such as we find in Plato's theory of the forms. Nevertheless, his notion of pursuing pleasure and avoiding pain contains a very firm basis for natural justice insofar as people agreed not to injure one another. He writes, there never was such a thing as absolute justice, but only an agreement made in mutual dealings among people in various places and times, which provides against the infliction or suffering of harm. While the specifics of the social agreement will vary from place to place, Epicurus argues the usefulness of some such social agreement is so apparent that societies will inevitably adopt it. I love this book. I got nothing to say. I just want to keep reading it. I want to keep reading it and sharing the things that are in it. I just want to keep doing that. That's just nice. Stoicism. Stoicism as a school of philosophy includes some of the most distinguished intellectuals of antiquity. Founded by Zeno of Citium, who assembled his school on the Stoa. So, founded by Zeno of Cythera, who assembled his own school on the Stoa, which is Greek for porch, hence the term Stoic. This philosophical movement attracted Cleanthes. I'm not sure how to say that one. Cleanthes and Aristo in Athens. Later it found such advocates in Rome as Cicero, Epictetus, Seneca, and Emperor Marcus Aurelius. This influence helped to fix the overwhelming emphasis of Stoic philosophy upon ethics, although the Stoics addressed themselves to all three divisions of philosophy formulated by Aristotle's Lyceum, namely logic, physics, and ethics. Wisdom and control versus pleasure. In their moral philosophy, the Stoics aimed at happiness, but unlike the Epicureans, they did not expect to find it in pleasure. Instead, the Stoics sought happiness through wisdom, a wisdom by which to control what lay within human ability and to accept with dignified resignation what had to be. Zeno was inspired as a youth by the ethical teachings and the life of Socrates, who had faced death with serenity and courage. This example of superb control over the emotions in the face of the supreme threat to one's existence, the threat of death, provided the Stoics with an authentic model after which to pattern their lives. Centuries later, the Stoic Epictetus said, "I cannot escape death, but can I not escape the dread of it?" Developing this same theme in a more general way, he wrote, "Do not demand that events should happen as you wish, but wish them to happen as they do happen, and you will go on well." We cannot control all events, but we can control our attitude toward what happens. It is useful to fear future events, for they will happen in any case, but it is possible by an act of will to control our fear. We should not, therefore, fear events. In a real sense, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. There is an elegant simplicity to this moral philosophy, and yet it was a philosophy for an intellectual elite. The goal was simple enough: to control our attitudes. But how did the Stoics arrive at it in a philosophical way? They did so by creating a mental picture of what the world must be like and how human beings fit into this world. The world, they said, is an orderly arrangement where people and physical things behave according to principles of purpose. They saw throughout all of nature the operation of reason and law. The Stoics relied on a special idea of God to explain this view of the world, for they thought of God as a rational substance existing not in some single location, but in all of nature, in all things. It was this kind of God, a pervading substantial form of reason that controls and orders the whole structure of nature, that the Stoics said determines the course of events. Herein lay the basis for moral philosophy, but the direction in which Stoic thought moved on these matters was set by their theory of knowledge. So now we'll go on into the Stoic theory of knowledge. That'll be the next thing we do. The Stoics explained in great detail how we can achieve knowledge. They did not entirely succeed in their account, but their theory of knowledge was nevertheless important for at least two reasons. One, it laid the foundation for their materialistic theory of nature, and two, it provided the basis for their conception of truth or certainty. Both of these consequences of the Stoic theory of knowledge stem from their account of the origin of ideas. Words, they said, express thoughts, and thoughts result from the influence of objects on the mind. The mind is blank at birth and builds up its store of ideas as it's exposed to the mind. Ah, the mind is blank at birth and builds up its store of ideas as it's exposed to objects. These objects make impressions on our minds through the channel of our senses. A tree, for example, impresses the image in our mind through the sense of vision, or in some way a seal leaves its imprint in wax. Repeated exposure to the world of things increases the number of impressions. Oh my gosh, sorry. Repeated exposure to the world of things increases the number of impressions, develops our memory, and enables us to form more general conceptions beyond the objects immediately before us. The real problem the Stoics faced was how to explain this last point, that is, how to account for general ideas such as goodness and beauty. They had to show how our thinking is related to our sensations. It is one thing to prove that our idea of a tree comes from our vision of trees, but how can we account for general ideas, ideas that refer to things beyond our senses? The Stoics replied that all thought is in some way related to the senses, even thoughts that represent judgments and inferences. A judgment or an inference that something is good or true is the product of the mechanical process of impressions. Our thinking in all its forms starts with impressions, and some of our thinking is based on impressions that start from within us, as in the case of feelings. Feelings can therefore give us knowledge. They are the source of irresistible perceptions, which in turn are the ground of our sense of certainty. As the skeptics later pointed out, this explanation cannot stand up to all the critical questions we might raise against it. In any case, through this theory, the Stoics not only found in it a basis for truth, but also imposed a distinctive slant on their general philosophy. For to argue as they did, all thought derives from the impact of objects on the senses, is to affirm that nothing real exists except things that possess some material form. Stoic logic had cast Stoic philosophy into a materialistic mold. Ah. Matter as the basis of all reality. This materialism provided Stoicism with an ingenious conception of the physical world and human nature. The broad picture the Stoics drew of physical nature followed from their position that all that is real is material. Everything in the universe is therefore some form of matter, but the world is not just a pile of inert or passive matter. It is a dynamic, changing, structured, and ordered arrangement. Besides inert matter, there is a force or power which represents the active shaping and ordering element in nature. This active power or force is not moving, subtle thing like an air current or breath. The Stoic It is a constantly moving subtle thing, like an air current or breath. The Stoics said it was fire, and this fire spread to all things, providing them with vitality. This material fire had the attribute of rationality, and since this was the highest form of being, the Stoics understood this rational force to be God. God in everything. The pivotal idea of Stoicism was the notion that God is in everything. When we say that God is in everything as fire or force or rationality, we imply that all of nature is filled with the principle of reason. It is a detailed manner the Stoics spoke of the permeability of matter. By which, in a detailed manner, the Stoics spoke of the permeability of matter, by which they meant that different types of matter are mixed up together. The material substance of God, they said, was mixed with what would otherwise be motionless matter. Matter behaves the way it does because of the presence in it, the principle of reason. Natural law is the continued behavior of matter in accordance with this principle. It is in the law or principle of a thing's nature. Thus, for the Stoics, nature has its origin in God, the warm, fiery matrix of all things, and all things immediately receive the impress of God's structuring reason. Because things continue to behave as they were arranged to behave, we can see how the Stoics developed their notions of fate and providence. Now we'll go into fate and providence. To the Stoics, providence meant that events occur the way they do because all things and people are under the control of the Logos, or God. The order of the whole world is based on the unity of all its parts, and what unifies the whole structure of matter is the fiery substance that permeates everything. Nothing rattles in the universe, for nothing is loose. Ultimately, the Stoics fashioned their moral philosophy against this background of a totally controlled material universe. Human nature. The Stoics knew that to build a moral philosophy it is necessary to have a clear view of what human nature is like. They shaped their view of human nature by simply transferring into the study of human beings the very same ideas they had used in describing nature at large. Just as the world has a material order permeated by the fiery substance called reason or God, so also a person is a material being who is permeated by this very same fiery substance. The Stoics are famous for the saying that people contain a spark of the divine within them. By this they meant that, in a real sense, a person contains part of the substance of God. God is the soul of the world, and each person's soul is part of God. This spark of the divine is a very fine and pure material substance that permeates a person's body, causing it to move and to be capable of all sensations. This pure material soul is transmitted by parents to children in a physical way. The Stoics thought that the soul was centered in the heart and that it circulated specifically through the bloodstream. What the soul added to the body was the delicate mechanism of the five senses, as well as the powers of speech and reproduction. But since God is the rational logos, the human soul is also rooted in reason, and consequently, human personality finds its unique expression in its rationality. For the Stoics, however, human rationality did not mean simply that people are able to think or to reason about things. Instead, human rationality means that a person's nature participates in the rational structure and order of the whole of nature. Human rationality represents our awareness of the actual order of things and our place in this order. It involves our awareness that all things obey law. To relate human behavior to this order of law was the chief concern of Stoic moral philosophy. Ethics and the human drama. According to Epictetus, moral philosophy rests on a simple insight wherein each person is an actor in a drama. What Epictetus meant when he used this image was that an actor does not choose a role. On the contrary, it is the author or director of the drama who selects people to play the various roles. In the drama of the world, it is God or the principle of reason who determines what each person will be and how he or she will be situated in history. Human wisdom, said the Stoics, consists in recognizing what our role in this drama is and then performing that part well. Some people have bit parts, while others are cast into leading roles. Epictetus explains, if it is God's pleasure that you should act a poor person, see that you act it well, or a handicapped person, or a ruler, or a private citizen, for it is your business to act well the given part. The actor develops a great indifference to those things over which he or she has no control, for example, the shape and form of the scenery, as well as the other players. The actor especially has no control over the story or its plot, but there is one thing that actors can control, and that is their attitudes and emotions. We can sulk because we have a bit part, or be consumed with jealousy because someone else has chosen to be the hero, or feel terribly insulted because the makeup artist has provided us with a particularly ugly nose. But neither sulking nor being jealous nor feeling insulted can in any way alter the fact that we have bit parts, are not heroes, and must wear an ugly nose. These feelings can only rob the actors of happiness. If we can remain free from these feelings, or develop what the Stoics called apathy, we will achieve a serenity and happiness that are the mark of a wise person. The wise person is the one who knows and accepts his or her role. The problem of freedom. There is, however, a persistent problem in Stoic moral philosophy, and this concerns the nature of human freedom. We can easily understand the Stoic notion that nature is fixed and ordered by God's reason, especially when we think of this grand scheme as a cosmic drama. It may be true that actors do not choose their roles, but what is the difference between choosing your role in the drama on the one hand and choosing your attitude on the other? If you are not free to choose one, how can you be free to choose the other? It could well be that God not only chose you to be a poor person, but also cast you as a particularly disgruntled poor person. Do attitudes float around freely, waiting to be chosen by the passing parade of people, or are they as much a part of the person as, say, eye color? The Stoics stuck doggedly to their notion that attitudes are under our control, and that by an act of will we can decide how we will react to events. But they never provided a satisfactory explanation for the fact that providence rules everything, while at the same time providence does not rule our attitudes. The closest they came to an explanation was to imply that whereas everything in the universe behaves according to divine law, it is the special feature of human beings that they behave according to the knowledge of the law. They behave according to their knowledge of the law. For example, water evaporates from the heat of the sun and later condenses and returns in the form of rain. But one drop never says to the other, "Here we go again," as if to register disgust at being uprooted from the sea. We undergo a similar process of change when we begin to age and face death. However, in addition to the mechanical process of aging, we know what is happening to us. No amount of additional knowledge will change the fact that we are mortal. Nevertheless, the Stoics built their whole moral philosophy on the conviction that if we knew the rigorous law and understand our role is inevitable, we will not strain against the inevitable, but will move cheerfully with the pace of history. Happiness is not a product of choice, it is rather a quality of existence, which follows from agreeing to what has to be. Freedom, therefore, is not the power to alter our destiny, but rather the absence of emotional disturbance. Cosmopolitanism and justice. Cosmopolitanism, that's how you say that one, and justice. The Stoics also developed a strong notion of cosmopolitanism, the idea that all people are citizens of the same human community. To look at the world process as a drama is to admit that everyone has a role in it. The Stoics viewed human relations as having the greatest significance, for human beings are the bearers of a divine spark. What relates people to each other is the fact that each person shares a common element. It is as though the Logos is a main telephone line and all people are on a conference call, thereby connecting God to all people and all people to each other. Or as Cicero put it, since reason exists both in people and God, the first common possession of human beings and God is reason. But those who have reason in common must also have a right reason in common. And since right reason is law, we must believe that people have law also in common with the gods. Further, those who share law must also share justice, and those who share these are to be regarded as members of the same commonwealth. Universal brotherhood and the theory of a universal natural law of justice were among the most impressive contributions made to Western thought by the Stoics. They injected basic themes into the stream of thought that was to have a decisive impact in the centuries to come, particularly in medieval philosophy. Although Stoicism shared many of the characteristics of Epicurean philosophy, it made some radical innovations. Like the Epicureans, the Stoics emphasized the practical concerns of ethics, regarded self control as the center of ethics, viewed all of nature in materialistic terms, and sought happiness as the end. The most significant variation injected by the Stoics was that they viewed the world not as the product of chance, but as the product of an ordering mind, or reason. This view involved the Stoics in a highly optimistic attitude regarding the possibilities of human wisdom, yet it was against this claim to wisdom, a claim that we can know so much about the detailed operation of the world, that the critical philosophy of the skeptics was developed. Skepticism. Today, we refer to skeptics as those whose basic attitude is that of doubt. But the old Greek word skeptikoi, from where skeptics is derived, meant something rather different, namely seekers or inquirers. The skeptics certainly were doubters too. They doubted that Plato and Aristotle had succeeded in discovering the truth about the world, and they had these same doubts about the Epicureans and Stoics. But for all their doubts, they were nevertheless seekers after a method for achieving a tranquil life. Pyrrho of Elis, 361 to 270 BCE, was the founder of the specific school of skepticism that had an especially profound impact on philosophy many centuries later. His particular approach is known as Pyrrhonism. Pyrrhonism. At the same time that Pyrrho was attracting followers, a rival school of skepticism emerged within Plato's academy, particularly through the leadership of Arcesilaus. Arcesilaus. Arcesilaus, circa 316 and 241 BCE, who was head of the academy. A generation or so after Plato, known as academics, they rejected Plato's metaphysics and revived Socrates' technique of dialectic argument, which they used as a tool for suspending judgment. Pyrrho wrote nothing, and the principal views of the academics survived mainly through second-hand histories and discussions. The principal surviving text of ancient Greek skepticism is by Sextus Empiricus, circa 200 CE, a follower of the Pyrrhonian tradition. In the opening sections of his Outlines of Pyrrhonism, Sextus offers an illuminating account of the meaning and purposes of the viewpoint of skepticism. A search for mental peace. What gave rise to skepticism? Sextus says that skepticism originated in the hope of attaining mental peace or calmness. People have been disturbed, he says, by the contradiction in things and plagued by doubt as to which alternative they should believe. One philosopher tells us one thing and another tells us something quite the opposite. Accordingly, the skeptics thought that if they could, by investigation, separate truth from falsehood, they could then attain mental tranquility. The skeptics were struck, however, by the different conceptions of truth that different philosophers had proposed. They also noticed that people who searched for truth could be placed into three groups. One, those who think they have discovered the truth, and these the skeptics called dogmatists. Two, those who confess they have not found it and also assert that it cannot be found, and this they also considered a dogmatic position. And three, those who persevere in the search for it. Unlike the first two groups, Sextus says that the skeptics keep on searching. Skepticism is not a denial of the possibility of finding truth, nor it is a denial of the basic facts of human experience. It is rather a continuous process of inquiry in which every explanation of experience is tested by a counter experience. The fundamental principle of skepticism, Sextus says, is that to every proposition an equal proposition is opposed. It is in consequence of this principle, he says, that we end by ceasing to dogmatize. The skeptics were greatly impressed by the fact that the same appearances result in a wide variety of explanations from those who experience them. They discovered also, Sextus says, that arguments opposed to each other seem to have equal force. That is, alternative explanations seem to have an equal probability of being correct. Accordingly, the skeptics were led to suspend judgment and to refrain from denying or affirming anything. From this suspension of judgment, they hoped to achieve an undisturbed and calm mental state. Evident versus non-evident matters. Clearly, the skeptics did not give up the enterprise of vigorous thought and debate, nor did they deny the evident facts about life, for example, that people become thirsty and hungry, and that they are in peril when they come near a precipice. It was obvious to the skeptics that people must be careful about their behavior. They had no doubt that they lived in the real world. They only wondered whether the world had been accurately described. No one, Sextus says, will dispute that objects have this or that appearance. The question is whether the object is in reality such as it appears to be. Therefore, even though the skeptics refused to live dogmatically, they did not deny the evident facts about experience. We pay due regard to appearances, says Sextus. Daily life seemed to the skeptics to require careful recognition of four items, which Sextus calls 1. The guidance of nature, 2. The constraint of the feelings, 3. The tradition of laws and customs, and 4. The instruction of the arts. Each of these contributes to successful and peaceful living, and one of them requires any dogmatic interpretation or evaluation. And not one of them requires any dogmatic interpretation or evaluation, only acceptance. Thus, it is by nature's guidance that we are naturally capable of sensation and thought. Also, it is by the force of our feelings that hunger drives us to food and thirst to drink, and it is to the tradition of laws and customs that constrains us in everyday life to accept piety as good and impiety as evil. Finally, Sextus says, it is by virtue of the instruction in the arts that we engage in those arts in which we choose to participate. There can be no doubt, therefore, that the skeptics were far from denying the evident facts of sense perception. Indeed, Sextus says that those who claim that the skeptics deny appearances seem to me to be unacquainted with the statements of our school. They did not question appearances, but only the account given of appearances. As an example, Sextus says that honey appears to be sweet, and this we grant, for we perceive sweetness through our senses. But the real question is whether honey is really in essence sweet. Thus, the arguments of the skeptics about appearance are expounded not with the intention of denying the reality of appearance, but in order to point out the rashness of the dogmatists. The moral Sextus drew from this treatment of the objects of sense was that if human reason can be so easily deceived by appearances, if reason is such a trickster as to all but snatch away the appearances from under our very eyes, should we not be particularly wary of following reason in the case of non-evident matters, and thus avoid rashness? Non-evident matters had a central place in the great philosophical systems of Plato, Aristotle, and the Stoics. Here the skeptics found elaborate theories, especially about the nature of physical things. But how can any theory of physics, an inquiry that deals with non-evident matters, give us reliable truth? The skeptics had a dual attitude toward the study of physics. On one hand, they refused to theorize about physics as if to find firm and confident opinions on any of the things in physical theory about which firm theories are held. Nevertheless, they did touch on physics in order to have, for every argument, an equal argument to oppose it, and for the sake of mental tranquility. Their approaches to matters of ethics and logic were similar in each case. Their pursuit of mental tranquility was not a negative approach or a refusal to think, but rather an active approach. Their method of the suspension of judgment involved the activity of setting things in opposition. As Sextus says, we oppose appearances to appearances, or thoughts to thoughts, or appearances to thoughts. Sextus then distinguished between two types of inquiry, namely, these dealing with evident matters and those dealing with non-evident matters. Evident matters, such as whether it is night or day, raise no serious problems of knowledge. In this category, too, are evident requirements for social and personal tranquility, for we know that customs and laws bind society together. But non-evident matters, for example, whether the stuff of nature is made of atoms or some fiery substance, do raise intellectual controversies. Whenever we go beyond the sphere of what is evident in human experience, our quest for knowledge should proceed under the influence of creative doubt. Oh, I like that word, creative doubt. Thus, if we ask how we know what the universe is like, the skeptics would answer that we do not yet know. It may be, they said, that people can attain the truth. It may also be that they are in error, but we cannot decide whether they have the truth or are in error because we do not yet have a reliable criterion for determining the truth in non-evident matters. Oh, jeez. I know this is dense. I just know this is dense, and I'm not really giving my opinions about nothing. But I really don't. I just want to read and, yeah, bring these thoughts into the air. I think that's the most important thing, really, about this. And also, you just got to think like, this is what I'm into. This is what I want to do. Just like, I don't know, talk about and read. But this is what I'm talking to people about throughout the whole day. I don't know. I just do this because I think there's something good here. Like I'm just taking steps. I don't know what the foundation is of the next step, but I feel like it will be positive, regardless of what it is. I just say that though because I'm just tired at this point. Like my brain's just tired. So it's hard for me to respond to some of these topics. But just, again, getting them out in the air. Billy Woods has a line where he says words live in the air. And he might not be the first one who said it, but I think they're supposed to live in the air as well. I think that sounds nice. That sounds about right. So the senses are deceptive. That's the next one we're going into. Sextus argued that if our knowledge comes from experience or sense impressions, then there is all the more reason to doubt the adequacy of our knowledge. For the fact is that our senses give us different information about the same object at different times and under different circumstances. For example, from a distance, a square building looks round. A landscape looks different at different times of day. And to some people, honey is bitter. Painted scenery at a theater gives the impressions of real doors and windows when only lines exist on a flat surface. That we do have impressions is certain, as for example when we see a bent oar in the water, but when we can never be certain about is what God. But what we can never be certain about is whether in fact the oar is bent. Although we can take the oar out of the water and discover the error of perception, not every perception affords such an easy test for its accuracy and truth. Most of our knowledge is based on perceptions for which we have no criterion of truth. The skeptic's conclusion is that we cannot be certain that our knowledge of the nature of things is true or not true. Moral rules raise doubts. Moral conceptions as well as physical objects are subject to doubt. People in different communities have different ideas of what is good and right. Customs and laws differ with each community, and in the same community at different times, the Stoics said that there is a universal reason in which all people share, leading to a general consensus of all people regarding human rights. Excuse me. The skeptics challenged both the theory and the facts, saying that there was no proof that all people have the capacity to agree on the truth of universal moral principles. Further, they argued there is no evidence that people in fact exhibit the universal agreement. The fact is, people disagree. Moreover, those who disagree can all make equally strong cases for their own points of view. On matters of morality, there is no absolute knowledge, that there is only opinion. The Stoics had argued that on certain matters the test for truth was irresistible perception. The skeptics responded by saying that the sad fact is that however strongly an opinion is held, it is, after all, still only an opinion, and we can, with as much evidence, support an opposite position. When people take a dogmatic stand, their conclusion always seems to them to be irresistible, but this is no guarantee that their conceptions are true. The consequence of this skeptical attitude toward our knowledge of nature of things and our knowledge of moral truth is that we have a right to doubt the validity of such knowledge. Since we lack sure knowledge, it is best to withhold judgment about the true nature of morality. When we face a problem or behavior, we want to know what is the right thing to do, and this requires knowledge of the right. Critics of skepticism, then, would argue that the skeptics had made ethics impossible and had removed from people any guidelines for behavior. Morality is possible without intellectual certainty. The skeptics argued, however, that it was not necessary to have knowledge in order to behave sensibly. It is enough, they said, to have reasonable assurance, or what they called probability. There could never be absolute certainty. What if there was a strong possibility that our ideas would lead us to a life of happiness and peacefulness? There could never be absolute certainty that if there was a strong possibility that our ideas Oh my gosh. There could never be absolute certainty that if there was a strong probability that our ideas would lead us to a life of happiness and peacefulness, we would be justified in following these ideas. We are able from daily experience to distinguish between notions that are not clear and those that have a high degree of clarity. When notions of right have a high degree of clarity, they create in us a strong belief that they are right, and this is all we need to lead us to action. For this reason, customs, the laws of the land, and our basic appetites are for the most part reliable guides. But even here, the skeptics argue a caution, so that we do not mistake appearance for reality, and above all, that we avoid fanaticism and dogmatism. Although we are able to act enthusiastically even without a criterion of truth, our psychological safety requires that we leave open the channels of inquiry. The only safe attitude to take is one of doubt about the absolute truth of any idea, including moral convictions. And the person who can maintain a sense of in imperturbability under this attitude of doubt has the best chance of achieving the happy life. And the person who can maintain a sense of imperturbability under this attitude of doubt has the best chance of achieving the happy life. If we ask whether the skeptics had a system, Sextus answers no. If, if by a system we mean an adherence to a number of dogmas which are dependent both on one another and on appearances, and where we can take dogma to mean assent to a non evident proposition, but if By a system, we mean a procedure which, in accordance with appearance, follows a certain line of reasoning indicating how it is possible to seem to live rightly. Then the skeptic did have a system, for as Sextus says, we follow a line of reasoning which points us to a life conformable to the customs of our country and its laws and institutions, and to our own instinctive feeling. Uh, Plotinus's life. Plotinus was born in Egypt around about 204 CE. He was the pupil of Ammonius Saccas in Alexandria. Alexandria was at this time an intellectual crossroads of the ancient world, and here Plotinus immersed himself in classical philosophy, including the ideas of Pythagoras, Plato, Aristotle, Epicurus, and the Stoics. Out of all these strands, he selected Platonism as the surest source of truth and indeed criticized the others by using his version of Plato's thoughts as his standard. At age 40, he traveled from Alexandria to Rome, which was experiencing considerable chaos in morality and religion, as well as social and political unrest. At Rome, he opened his own school, to which he attracted some of the city's elite, including the emperor and his wife. For a while, he planned to develop a city based on the theories of Plato's Republic to be called Platonopop. To be called Platonopolis, but this plan was never realized. He wrote 54 treatises with no particular order and in a style less eloquent than his speech. These treatises were assembled after Plotinus's death by the ablest pupil, Porphyry, Porphyry, who arranged them into sets of nines, or as they are now called, Enneads. Enneads. Plotinus was a brilliant lecturer and at the same time a man of spiritual idealism. Indeed, it was his moral and spiritual force combined with his intellectual rigor that influenced not only his contemporaries but especially Augustine. Later, Augustine said that Plotinus would have to change only a few words to become a Christian. In any case, the thought of Plotinus became a major strand in most medieval philosophy. What made Plotinus's philosophy distinctive was that he combined a speculative description of reality with a religious theory of salvation. He not only described the world, but also gave an account of its source, of our place in it, and of how we overcome our moral and spiritual difficulties in it. In short, Plotinus developed a theory about God as the source of all things and as that to which people must return. In formulating his thought, Plotinus successfully analyzed and rejected as inadequate the views of the Stoics, Epicureans, Pythagoreans, and Aristotelians. Among his objections to these schools of thought was his conviction that they did not understand the true nature of the soul. The Stoics described the soul as a material body, a physical breath. But Plotinus argued that neither the Stoics nor the Epicureans, both materialists, understood the essential independence of the soul from the material body. Likewise, the Pythagoreans, who said that the soul is the harmony of the body, would have to admit that when the body is not in harmony, it has no soul. Finally, Plotinus rejected Aristotle's notion that the soul is the form of the body, and as such cannot exist without a body. For Plotinus, if part of the body lost its form, in that extent the soul would also be deformed. This would make the body primary, whereas Plotinus said it is it is the soul that is primary and gives life to the body as a whole. Everything for Plotinus turned upon the accurate understanding of a person's essential nature. To understand human nature, Plotinus pursued the line of thought Plato had set forth in his vivid myths and allegories. He was struck by Plato's comprehensive treatment of reality. There was Plato's account of the demiurge fashioning matter into the world. There was also Plato's theory that the form of the good is like the rays of light emanating from the sun. Next, there was Plato's notion that the soul has an existence before it enters the body. It before it enters the body is a prisoner in the body, and the struggles to escape from this captivity and return to its source. Finally, there was Plato's conviction that we find true reality in the spiritual world and not in the material world. Plotinus took these basic ideas, emphasizing particularly that the central Platonic theme was only the spirit is true reality, and reformulated Plato's ideas into a new kind of Platonism. God as the One. The material world, with its multiplicity of things, cannot be the true reality, Plotinus thought, because it is always changing. The true changeless reality is God, about whom nothing specifically descriptive can be said except that he absolutely transcends or lies beyond everything in the world. For this reason, God is not material, is not finite, and is not divisible. He has no specific form, either as matter, soul, or mind, each of which undergoes change. He cannot be confined to any idea or ideas of the intellect, and for this reason cannot be expressed in any human language. He is accessible to none of our senses and can only be reached in a mystical ecstasy that is independent of any rational or sense experience. For this reason, Plotinus spoke of God as the One, signifying thereby that in God there is absolutely no complexity and that indeed God is absolute unity. The One signifies, moreover, that God does not change. He is indivisible, has no variety, is uncreated, and is in every way unalterable. Plotinus held that the One cannot be the sum of particular things, because it is precisely these things whose finite existence requires explanations and a source. Thus, the One cannot be any existing thing, but is prior to all existence. There are no positive attributes that we can ascribe to the One, because all our ideas of attributes are derived from finite physical things. It is not possible, therefore, to say that God is this and not that, since this procedure would attach to God certain limits. To say, then, that God is one is to affirm that God is and that God transcends the world. It is to say that he is simple, without any duality, potentiality, or material limitation, and that he transcends all distinctions. In a sense, God cannot engage in any self-conscious activity, since this would imply complexity through thinking particular thoughts before and after, thus implying change. God in no way resembles a human. He is indeed simply one, absolute unity. The metaphor of emanation. If God is one, he cannot create. For creation is an act, and activity implies change. Then how can we account for the many things of the world? Striving to maintain a consistent view of the unity of God, Plotinus explained the origin of things by saying that they came from God, not through a free act of creation, but through necessity. To express what he meant by necessity, Plotinus used several metaphors, especially the metaphor of emanation. Things emanate. They flow from God, the way light emanates from the sun or the way water flows from a spring. The sun is never exhausted, and it does not do anything. It just is. And being what is, the sun necessarily emanates light. In this way, God is the source of everything, and everything manifests God, but nothing is equal to God, any more than the rays of light are equal in any way to the sun. All of these emanations fall on the spectrum between pure being, that is, God himself, and complete non-existence. Thus, Plotinus does not appear to be a strict pantheist, the view that God is identical with nature as a whole. Although the entire universe consists of God and his emanations, there is nevertheless a hierarchical arrangement in nature. Just as the light closest to the sun is the brightest, so also the highest form of being is the first emanation. Plotinus described this first emanation from the One as mind, or nous. It is most like the One, but is not absolute and can therefore be said to have a specific attribute or character. This nous is thought or universal intelligence, and signifies the underlying rationality of the world. It is the nature of rationality to have no spatial or temporal boundaries. But rationality does imply multiplicity in that thinking contains the ideas of all particular things. The world soul. Just as light emanates from the sun in ever-diminishing intensity, so also is there a decline in the degrees of perfection as emanations are farther from God. Moreover, each succeeding emanation is the cause of the next lower emanation, as if there were a principle at work requiring that every nature be that every gosh as if there were a principle at work requiring that every nature bring into being that which is immediately subordinate to it. In this way, the nous is in turn the source of the next emanations, which Plotinus calls the soul. The soul of the world has two aspects, looking upward, as it were, toward nous, or pure rationality. The soul strives to contemplate the eternal ideas of all things. Looking downward, it further emanates one thing at a time and provides the life principle to all of nature. It thus bridges the gap between the ideas of things in nous and the realm of the natural world. The activity of the soul accounts for the phenomenon of time. Since now there is the emergence of things, the relations of things to each other result in events, and events come after one another. And this relationship of events is what we mean by time. To be sure, the One, the nous, and the world soul are all co-eternal and are thus outside of time. Below the world soul lies the realm of nature and of particular things, which reflects through time the changing eternal ideas. Man, the human soul. The human soul is an emanation from the world soul. Like the world soul, it also has two aspects. Again, looking upward, the human soul shares an nous, or universal reason. Looking downward, the human soul becomes connected with, but is not identical to, the body. Here, Plotinus reaffirmed Plato's theory of the pre-existence of the human soul, believing also that the union of the soul with the body is a product of a fall. Moreover, after death, the human soul survives the body and conceivably enters a sequence of transmigrations from one body to another. Being spiritual and therefore truly real, the human soul will not be annihilated but will join all other souls again in the world soul. While in the body, it is the human soul that provides the power of rationality, sensitivity, and vitality. The world of matter. At the lowest level in the hierarchy of being, that is, at the farthest removed from the One, is matter. There's a principle at work in emanation which requires that the highest grades of being overflow in accordance with the next realm of possibilities. After ideas and souls, then, there is the world of material objects. It exhibits a mechanical order whose operation or movement is the work of reason, subjecting all objects to the laws or rules of cause and effect. Once again, the material world displays a higher and lower aspect. The higher component is its susceptibility to the laws of motion. However, the lower component, its bare material nature, is a dark world of gross matter that moves aimlessly with sluggish discord toward collision and extinction. Plotinus compared matter to the dimmest and furthest reach of light, the most extreme limit of light, which is darkness itself. Darkness, clearly, is the very opposite of light. Similarly, matter is the opposite of spirit, and therefore is the opposite of the One. Again, insofar as the matter exists in conjunction with the soul, either the individual soul or the world soul, to this extent, matter is not complete darkness. But just as the light tends to emanate finally to the point of utter darkness, and so also matter stands at the boundary line of nothingness, where it tends to disappear into non-being. The causes of evil. Through the theory of emanation, Plotinus argued that God necessarily overflows in order to share his perfection as much as possible. God could not reduplicate himself perfectly. He did so in the only possible way, namely by representing all the possible degrees of perfection by means of the emanations. To represent all degrees of perfection, it was necessary to have not only the nous, N-O-U-S, but also the lowest level of being, namely matter. However, within this lowest level we find various evils, pain, the continuing warfare of the passions, and finally death and sorrow. How could the perfect One, from whom everything ultimately emanates, permit this kind of imperfection to exist among human beings? Plotinus explained the problem of evil in various ways. For one thing, he said, evil in its own way occupies a place in the hierarchy of perfection, since without evil something would be lacking in the scheme of things. Evil is like the dark shadings of a portrait, which greatly enhance the beauty of the image. Moreover, all events occur with rigorous necessity, as the Stoics had argued. Thus, the good person does not look on them as evil, and the bad person can consider this to be just punishment. Thus, the good person does not look on them as evil, and the bad person can consider this to be just punishment. But Plotinus finds the best explanation of evil in his account of matter. For Plotinus, matter is the necessary and final reach of the emanation from the One. The very nature of emanation, as we have seen, is that the higher levels necessarily move toward the lower. The One generates the nous, nous, and finally the individual soul generates a material body. Brute matter, however, continues the process of emanation, as if moving farther and farther from the One. The way the light grows dimmer and dimmer, the farther it moves from the sun. There is then a tendency for matter to move beyond, or separate itself from the activity of the soul, and to engage in motion that is not rationally directed. Again, as matter faces upward, it encounters the soul or the principle of rationality. For objects in nature, this accounts for the orderliness of their movements. For individual people, it means that the body responds to the activity of the soul at the levels of rationality, sensitivity, appetite, and vitality. But the natural tendency of matter is to face downward because of the downward momentum of emanation. Because of its downward thrust, matter encounters darkness itself, and at this point, matter is separated from rationality. The clue to the problem of moral evil, then, is that the soul is now united with the material body, and in spite of the rational character of the soul, it must contend with the body, whose material nature disposes it to move downward and away from rational control. When the body reaches the level below rationality, it becomes subject to an indefinite number of possible ways of acting. It is the job of the passions to move the body to respond to all kinds of appetites. Evil, then, is the discrepancy between the soul's right intentions and its actual behavior. It is an imperfection in the soul-body arrangement, and much of the cause for this imperfection is ascribed to the final irrational movement of the material body. Matter, or body, is the principle of evil in the sense that matter is at the fringe of emanation, where the absence of rationality results in formlessness and the least degree of perfection. But since matter comes from God in the sense that everything emanates from the One, it could be said that God is the source of evil. Still, evil for Plotinus is not a positive destructive force. It is not a devil or rival god contending with the good God, nor, as some Zoroastrian philosophers thought, is it a contest between the co-equal forces of light and darkness. Evil for Plotinus is simply the absence of something. It is the lack of perfection and the lack of form for the material body, which is not itself essentially evil. A person's moral struggle is therefore a struggle not against some outside force, but against the tendency to be undone within, to become disordered, to lose control of the passions. Evil, again, is no thing, but rather is the absence of order. The body as such is not evil. Evil is the formlessness of matter, as darkness is the absence of light. Throughout his analysis, Plotinus tries simultaneously to argue that the soul is responsible for its acts and that all events are determined. Just how these two views can be reconciled is not exactly clear. At the same time, much of Plotinus's appeal came from the promise of salvation, which he thought his philosophy could provide. And that's what we'll be ending with tonight, is the salvation topic. Plotinus moved from his philosophical analysis of emanation to the religious and mystical plan of salvation. The mystery cults of his day offered a swift fulfillment of a person's desire to unite with God. By contrast, Plotinus described the soul's ascent to unity with God as a difficult and painful task. This ascent required that a person develop successively the moral and intellectual virtues. Since the body and the physical world were not considered evil per se, it was not necessary to reject them altogether. Plotinus's key insight was that the physical things of the world must not distract the soul from its higher aims. We should renounce the world as a means of facilitating the soul's ascent to intellectual activity, as in philosophy and science. We must discipline ourselves in rigorous and correct thinking. Such thinking lifts us out of our individuality, and with a broad knowledge of things, we tend to relate the self to the whole arrangement of the world. All the steps up this ladder of knowledge lead toward the final union of the self with the One in a state of ecstasy, where there is no longer any consciousness of the self's separation from God. This ecstasy is the final result of right conduct, correct thinking, and the proper disposition of the affections. Plotinus felt that achieving this union could require many incarnations of each soul. Finally, the soul is refined and purified in its love, and as Plato said in his Symposium, is capable of the fullest self-surrender. At this point, the process of emanation is fully reversed, and the self merges once again with the One. For many, Plotinus's Neoplatonism had all the power of religion and represented a compelling alternative to Christianity, although its intricate intellectual scheme prevented it from becoming widely popular. Neoplatonism had a considerable impact on the emerging Christian theology of this era. Augustine saw in the Enneads Enneads of Plotinus, a strikingly new explanation of evil and of salvation through orderly love. Through Augustine, Neoplatonism became a decisive element in the intellectual expression of the Christian faith during the Middle Ages. And so we have Augustine coming up next. That was nice. That was nice. That was nice. This whole thing is nice, man. It just is. Yeah, it's just good to be talking like this, thinking like this. It's just good. That's it. That's it. That's it. It's just nice. All right, Augustine. We'll do that one. I'll see you later.